Call this public planning meeting to order, and if I could have councillors Bagu and Hoyle move the agenda. Any questions to the agenda this evening? All in favor? That's carried. Disclosures of interest. I have one disclosure of interest with Councillor Beauregard with regards to item 4.2, the public meeting report for draft plan, red line revision, and zoning bylaw amendment for Rosedale Estates, 2024-08. Further disclosures? Great. So before we get into our statutory public meetings, please silence your cell phones or any iPads or whatever you've got out there, please. Just to make sure the rules of order is if we do have some delegations for the two reports or issues that we're dealing with. We will ask those that are in the public to come forward. You'll come up to the podium here. There's a red button. You'll push that. Everybody gets 10 minutes, just so you know, you get 10 minutes to speak. No cheering, clapping, getting all riled up, all that stuff. Let's stay as calm as possible with regards to this. Just so you know, there are no decisions being made tonight. This is information that staff is collecting for the report that will come back to council at a later date for each issue. It allows council to ask the proponent or even a delegate any questions. We do have some written delegations. We won't read those out, but they are given to staff with regards to how the report's going to be written. They'll take into consideration items of that have to do with planning with regards to what they're going to give us as a final report. So just to let you guys know what's going on. So first we have item 4.1, which is the public meeting report of zoning bylaw amendment at 179 Melby Avenue and 56 and a half Main Street West, file number D14-08-23, 2024-06. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mayor Steele, and good evening, council, members of the public, and anyone tuning in at home. The purpose of this meeting is pursuant to Section 34 of the Planning Act and to consider an application submitted by Rochelle Larocque of the Biglieri Group for the property on the southeast corner of Melby Avenue and Main Street West, municipally known as 179 Melby Avenue and 56 and a half Main Street West. The application proposes to amend the zoning bylaw to permit a mixed-use apartment building containing 101 residential units and 131.58 square meters of commercial space. Notice of the public meeting was administered in accordance with Section 34 of the Planning Act as amended in Ontario Regulation 545/06. The notice of public meeting was circulated to required agencies, to property owners within 120 meters of the lands on December 19th, 2023. And meeting details had been provided along with the council agenda on the city's website and under current applications. As of the date of this meeting, no adverse comments have been received from internal departments or required agencies. Written comments have been received from Trish McCoy, and the following concerns have been raised. Concerns with the height of the building and privacy concerns, concerns with it negatively impacting the nearby heritage buildings, notes that 101 units should have parking for 101 units, concerns with traffic becoming worse on the island, especially when the bridges are up, and concern with the units not being designed to accommodate families, and Trish notes that she wouldn't be opposed to a 4 or 5 story apartment building. The procedure to be followed this evening will be to present Development and Legislative Services Department Planning Division Report 2024-06, followed by a presentation from Rochelle Larocque of the Biglieri Group, receive questions of clarification from council, open the meeting to the public for comments, and announce the requirements under the Planning Act for written notice of passage of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. At this time, I would like to present Planning Division Report 2024-06. Next slide, please. Thank you. The subject lands are located on the southeast corner of Main Street West and Melby Avenue. The surrounding land uses include downtown commercial properties and parkland. Next slide, please. The City of Port Colborne official plan currently designates the property as downtown commercial. Land uses in the downtown commercial designation include retail stores, professional business offices, residential uses, restaurants, specialty shops, community facilities, parks, institutional uses, public and open space, and bicycle routes. Next slide, please. The zoning bylaw currently zones the subject lands in 2 zones. The 179 Melby Avenue parcel is zoned 4th density residential, or R4, and the 56.5 Main Street West parcel is zoned downtown commercial, or DC. The zoning bylaw amendment proposes to change the zoning of both parcels to a site-specific special provision of the downtown commercial, or DC zone, to permit the proposed building. Next slide, please. The following site-specific amendments to the downtown commercial zone are proposed. A reduction in parking from 1.25 spaces per unit to 0.5 spaces per unit, to permit a maximum gross floor area of 216%, where 200% is permitted for residential uses. A reduction in minimum landscaped area from 25% to 10.8%, and to establish a building height of 25.9 meters. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to pass the floor to the applicant, who will provide a brief presentation. To any interested members of the public, there is a sign-in sheet at the back of the room. If you'd like to receive any future notices regarding this application, please feel free to sign your name and you will be sent a copy. At this time, we'd have Rochelle Larocque for a presentation. Thank you.
Hi, Rochelle. Yeah, just over to the podium, and there's a red button on the speaker to the left of the screen there. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. And perfect. Thank you. As Mr. Schultz identified, my name is Rochelle Larocque. I'm a registered professional planner with the Biglieri Group out of Hamilton. Next slide, please. So as identified, the properties that we're discussing tonight are 56.5 Main Street and 179 Melby. The property uses to the, just to provide some context, to the west is shown on the screen. To the south is Block 8 Park. Oh, and now my presentation is gone. Perfect. Okay. To provide a bit more context, to provide the context overall, in addition to the aerial photo that was already shown, the property is highlighted on the island, adjacent to Lock 8 Park, and along Main Street, which is part of the commercial and downtown area. Next slide, please. And then to provide a bit more context at ground level. Next slide, please. So as was identified, the properties are identified as being within the built-up area within the Niagara Region official plan, which is identified as being both in the regional's official plan as well as provincial policy as the area to increase density to provide additional units, being both residential and commercial. This project would be able to contribute to both the region and the city's intensification target of 50%, and the town or the city's official plan identifies that a minimum of 15% of all intensification should be within this downtown corridor, which this application contributes to and complies with. So the purpose of the applications is because of the split zoning. The northern property at the 56 and 56.5 Main Street is currently zoned downtown commercial, and the southerly portion is zoned 4th density residential, or R4. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing is an 8-story building total. The footprint along Main Street will be 6 stories in height. The purpose being, we've looked at the shadows along Main Street and felt it would cast too many if we went to the 8 stories. So we've dropped it down to 6 stories along Main Street and 8 stories at the back along Melby. A total of 101 units are being proposed within the building. And it's a range in sizes from about 600 square feet to about 1,100 square feet in size to provide a greater range of the different types of users and family sizes that may need to and may want to buy into this building. We're proposing that ground floor commercial will be maintained along Main Street, approximately 1,000 square feet or 1,300 square feet of commercial space will be maintained. We felt that that was the appropriate mix to contribute to the commercial corridor as well as provide commercial uses for the additional residential units, but not detract from the existing commercial there along Main Street, because we don't want to oversaturate the market and result in empty storefronts along the Main Street. Behind that Main Street commercial area will be ground level parking enclosed within the building. And I'll get to the parking in a minute. There will be accessible units on the main floor as well as on the second floor. In addition, there's a second floor terrace area that will be available to residents, as well as an 8th story terrace that will also be public or private amenity space for the future residents. Next slide. So there are a number of modifications to the zoning bylaw that are required to the downtown commercial zone. And to, I guess, address the elephant in the room, our request for 0.5 parking spaces, whereas 1.2 is required in the zoning bylaw. The reason being, at this point, we've been in conversation and discussions with the St. Lawrence Seaway Authority for approximately a year to discuss a joint use agreement for us to improve the parking area in Lockgate Park and to have our own parking area. As you're aware, working with St. Lawrence Seaway Authority is not a quick process, but we are hoping that by bringing this to council, and we are asking for favorable support of the application, this will provide the impetus for the Seaway Authority to take our request and take our application more seriously. In addition to speaking with St. Lawrence Seaway about using these lands, we've also been in discussion with city staff about using city lands and entering into an agreement with the city. Unfortunately, the city lands that are within this area have been identified that they're going to be used for alternate uses, and there are other plans for them. So at this time, we were unable to come to any agreement with the city to use these lands for our parking, additional parking. So that is, I guess, one of the areas that I know council will have questions on, but I wanted to provide the rationale that we wanted to continue the movement and the momentum that we have on this application. Rather than having the reports and the lands continue to sit, we wanted to move forward with this application as the studies were completed. However, that agreement with the Seaway Authority has not been achieved yet. As part of the development of this property, a future draft plan of condominium as well as a site plan application will also be submitted. Next slide, please. So, as I said, we've completed a number of studies in support of this application. We have architectural drawings as well as elevations, which are my next slides. Civil engineering has been completed. We've completed a heritage consultation to review any concerns with heritage matters as well as archaeological matters. Nothing was identified as part of these studies. In addition to that, the traffic study was completed by Paradigm to look at the impact of 101 units on the property as well as the commercial uses and any impact on the intersections in the area. Based on their review of current traffic patterns, and I will say that the study was completed in August of 2023, so at peak season, that it identified that there will be, in the traffic engineer's terms, minimal impact on the road network within the city if this development moves forward. Next slide, please. So to provide the pictures of what we're looking at developing, this would be the elevation looking towards Main Street from the southwest corner of the building. As you can see, that ground floor where there is parking is enclosed and is made to look like it's part of the building. So it won't be, it'll be aesthetically pleasing, and it will add to the streetscape, and it will not look unpleasant, and it will maintain good urban design within the city. Next slide, please. This would be the view from the east, so from Lock 8 Park. This is what that side of the building would look like. As you can see, that second floor amenity area is just kind of peeking up over the top. Next slide. And then this gives more of a bird's eye view of what that east face of the building or east facing building area would look like, with the second floor amenity space on top of the parking area, as well as the rooftop amenity on the 8th floor. Next slide, and I think that's my last one. And I'm available for any questions should you have them.
Great, thank you. Council, any questions? Councillor Hoyle.
Hi, through the mayor. My first question is just clarity. Maybe Mr. Schultz could answer this. The parking lots around this proposed project and the park is ours, or it is the Seaways?
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is owned by the Seaway or Transport Canada. It is leased by the city for the park.
So basically, they can go ahead and make an agreement at any time if they so choose.
Through the mayor, I think the city would definitely be involved in that. I know our ECDev staff have been working with the applicant for the last little while over this. So that would be some discussion that I think the three of us, the three agencies that would be at that table.
Another question I have is, obviously you brought up the parking. I mean, that's the elephant, right? You have ground floor parking, but only 51 spots, and that's why you're looking for additional parking outside, which is some of it's already there, and then says a new existing one. So they'll be adding a new one if the Seaway goes for it. My concern is now we're taking parking away from the park area. So with events and families, and I mean, this is not it's one of our more pronounced parks. So we're taking away parking that could be used and accessibility to that park. So I have, no offense, a little bit of a issue with giving up that kind of parking that our citizens require. I mean, it's not like it's a not used park, because it is used. The other thing I had was questions about the height. Did you say it was 6 feet in the front and then more to the back is the 8? Or is that, why is that after? I mean, sorry, 6 stories and then 8?
3, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. 6 stories along Main Street, and then 8 stories stepped back.
See, I'm not a planner, so whatever, but 8 in that area is seems a little high, and I sat there all during Christmas break trying to think of different ways, and then it could help your parking just issue is maybe 5, I know if I'm even allowed to even say it, but the height 5-ish would lower how much extra parking you need. But again, I'm not a developer, but I can't see giving up parking for this project, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Further questions? Counselor Elliott?
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to presenter, and I'll just pick up on what Councillor Hoyle was talking about. And parking is a absolute major concern for me. As presented, I could not support this at all, not even close. When you look at your proposed development site plan map, and it shows the overhead of all of the parking spaces surrounding the property, are you wanting to take all of those spots for this development?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent wouldn't be that we are taking all of those spots. It's to show what the existing parking is there now, as well as identifies, and unfortunately it's at a scale that is hard to read on these computers, but a portion of it that's already existing would remain for public parking, and then new parking for residents would be created.
Counselor?
In the existing parking spaces? Or are you talking that there would be a new parking lot constructed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there would be new parking lots constructed.
So of the existing spaces that are there, how many are you looking to take control of?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we aren't looking at taking any of the existing parking spots away. We would leave the parking spots that are existing for the park use. We would be looking at adding new spaces for our use.
And how many spaces would that be? Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor.
I will have to get back to you on that one. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I will just have to do that quick calculation.
Because when I've been looking at this over and over again, there is absolutely no parking on Main Street and Melby, on-street parking. So you would have to contain all of your residents and all of your visitors in off-street parking. And you show 50 spaces now, so you need another 75 spaces to accommodate just to get to the requisite for the city in the 1.25. That doesn't include your commercial space. So with commercial space, are you trying to attract outside customers, or is it just the people that live in the building?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it would be both. We'd be looking to add to the existing Main Street and the commercial uses that are along there, as well as providing services to the residents in the building. And as part of any agreement with the Seaway Authority, we would be adding those additional 75 spaces. It wouldn't be including any of the existing spaces that are currently at the park.
Okay, just because, and through you, Mr. Mayor, just because the diagram is up on it, I'm just trying to find exactly what the total spaces are at the existing parking. And I'm trying to find out what the highest number is. So it's around 77?
77 new ones, if I can count them,
On the existing parking.
not including the existing ones. That's what it looks like if I count the ones.
So you would basically, I'm going to estimate, have to replicate parking lot the size of the existing one there to accommodate the building itself.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
So that's an awful lot of green space being taken away from the park to accommodate your parking. That's an issue for me. There are a lot of people that use that park. There's a lot of tourists that come in. They use the park to watch the ships as they go into the lock and out of the lock. That's problematic for me. And I just want to ask one other question through you, Mayor. You say that the traffic study showed little to no impact. Any chance they were there when the Middle Bridge and the Clarence Street Bridge were up and everybody's trying to file across Main Street Bridge? You literally have hundreds and hundreds of cars lined up on both sides trying to get across. And how they would come up with it would have little impact. Is interesting. So, I don't know how they did their study, what they looked at, if they looked at when the bridges were up, when they were down. So there's no, the impact study isn't attached to this, so we have no way of reading what they did. So if you could provide us with that, that would be interesting. That's all. Thank you.
David?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, we can have that provided. Yeah.
Councilor Bruno?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you to the presenter. I won't belabor the parking issue that's already been clearly enunciated, but I did want you to know a little historical fact of recent vintage. And that is, I don't think there's anybody on this council that would feel comfortable with just having had a development application here that didn't have sufficient parking, and they reduced the number of apartment units to accommodate the parking. That's fairly recent. I think we've had a strong stand on that. And I'd argue that arguably they could have had some street parking, and we didn't advise that they used that in the numbers. I went over to the park, and I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you, when you say won't be touching the parking at the park, what do you define as the park's parking currently?
There are existing parking lots, through you, Mr. Mayor, there are existing parking lots at the park. Those existing parking lots are not being counted as part of what we would be adding for parking. So those existing parking lots would not be part of our calculation and would not be part of our expectation that would be used for residents parking. Those would continue to be parking for park purposes.
Councilor?
Thank you. I guess I don't want to get detailed into the semantics, but you know, if you go through the entrance driveway there to the Seaway Lock gate, backing onto those houses there as part of your proposal, I might have my numbers mixed up here, but there's, I think, 12 there and 9 on the other side next to the house that you agreed not to purchase. So I don't know how many there were opposite that, but just for this point, you know, I could easily see someone saying that the parking is all those slots up against the grass of the park. The parking that's against the back of your property, are you defining that as the parking lot and you would not be using those spaces, or are you counting that in because it's up against your land?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, parking in that area we would be looking at using for our proposal.
So just so everyone knows, the mirror image across from the park towards yours, those spots you would be looking at acquiring or leasing or whatever.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at the south behind
Yes.
our property, yes, we
Yes.
would be looking at that area for
Right.
parking for our development.
So I think there's 9 or 12 there. So let's argue that let's agree that it's 12. On the other side of Mr. Schwartz's home, up against that side, I think there's the 9. Are you looking at using that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is that no, we would not be looking at using those.
So to my colleagues' points, those 12 that abut up against your land obviously were built for the park. I don't know if Mr. Schultz knows whether that any of those spots are within the agreement. Perhaps we could find out.
Yeah, it's 9, Councilor.
So, thank you.
No, it's 9. There's 9 spots there.
9 spots. Oh, thank you.
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, we can definitely take a look at the existing agreement with the clerk's office and see what we can find, yeah.
Great, thank you. If I could just ask a little background.
Microphone?
If I could just ask a little background on, we've had a lot of developers, and we've had builders, and we've had financiers who get the property approved and sell it. All legal entities, not disputing that. Your owner-client, is he a developer builder? And could you point to anything that he's done, perhaps, that we could look at?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, my client is a developer builder. They are local, so they are a Niagara-based business. They are currently developing properties in Niagara Falls, as well as received approval for a project in Welland in December. So those projects will start to get off the ground soon.
Sure. Any buildings that you could point to currently built?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, off the top of my head, I can't. I've recently been brought on as part of this client, so any of their historic developments prior to my starting with them, I'm not aware of.
Okay. Could you provide those to?
I can provide those.
Thank you. In Niagara, if you could. And finally, you used one of your renderings, I believe it was the previous one, and I'll quote you, says, "That is how it will look." So, you really, at this point, unless your buyer, and I don't know how we as a city guarantees who builds it and how it will look. So is that the actual look of the park your developer is going to build?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent, and I guess to back it up a little bit, I wouldn't be here presenting a building that I didn't feel that my client wasn't going to be willing to build. So these are the renderings that they have created to say, this is what I'm going to build, and this is what I have seen through the entire process of working on this application with my client. This has been consistently the design that they have presented to us. So in my opinion, yes, they are presenting you what they plan on building.
Great, thank you. And just lastly, is there any chance you could provide, not tonight, I'm trying to look at, I know the word, it escapes me right now, but the inserting that development in an aerial drawing of the entire area. In other words, I'd like to see something where they superimpose the development into the surrounding properties.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I am sure people who are much better at computers than I am can prepare something for you and have it circulated.
Great, thank you. Actually, that was my first question I should have asked. You said that, and we understand, and you're spot on with the issues with the Seaway and the time constraints that you have, and that you'd like to be able to go to them, as I understand it, to provide some context that the city's dealt with this and they would consider it. And so in what form do you see that coming back to you? Because I'm very skeptical about just doing an approval at some point conditional upon parking until we've seen those other things. Staff has gone back and taken tonight's questions. But perhaps you could just enunciate now or in the future what you're looking for in the first instance.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in my opinion, this is a good first start in saying to the Seaway Authority, we are serious, we've made the application, we've come to the public meeting, these are the comments that we've received from council, this is how we plan on responding to them. But one of the major issues continues to be parking, an ability to provide parking, an ability to have some sort of agreement with the Seaway Authority moving forward. We'll see how that works, and then see what the next things that the Seaway Authority may require or might be looking for. And we may be back in front of council again, asking for additional assistance.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Schultz to that comment. How does that land with respect to the time constraints on an application submitted? So there are a number of days for which you have to come back with a report. So I believe the clock is counting, or is it not ticking, or is it not?
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, the clock starts ticking as soon as the application is complete. Yeah,
And so that has started.
correct.
And so we may have 60 to 70 days left before this comes back?
If I remember correctly, I think March 7th is the 90-day timeline.
Okay. So what happens in the event that the applicant can't get any assurity from the Seaway and the clock is ticked? If that is then turned down because they don't have that assurity, does this start back at the beginning? And that's the end of the file?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it certainly depends on how council wants to proceed with it. There is mechanisms where council could put a hold on the property, where, you know, they, in a sense, they are approving the zoning subject to that approval or that agreement in place with the Seaway. So there is that option. Otherwise, if council isn't you know, in support of it, then the other option would be to turn the application down.
So in that event, it's conditional. The applicant could come back with a number less than 1.25 and see if we're buying it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not necessarily, no. The parking rate would be set at the time of that approval, but it would be subject to that additional agreement with the Seaway. Council could also say, you know, they could approve a higher rate of parking, say 1-to-1. There is that option, or 1.25, and then from there, if the applicant can't work with the Seaway and come to an agreement, then they would have to potentially revise the plans to meet that requirement on site.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Baggio?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Rochelle. You've heard about the parking. I'm not going to talk too much about that. This apartment, the carbon footprint, like, is this climate change friendly building, or is this just something that everybody's done for the last 30 years?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I will not say that I am a builder. My area of expertise is in planning. I know that there are requirements through the building code, and there are other incentives to include more green energy and more green infrastructure within buildings. What its ultimate carbon footprint will be, that I can't provide to you. However, I can say that by providing denser uses within your downtown core encourages people to be able to walk, to cycle, to use methods of getting around in town that don't rely on a car, recognizing that although transit in the region may or may not be improving, it is still difficult to get around via transit. However, putting people within walking and cycling distance to users, or to uses that they need to get to on a daily basis, will hopefully reduce any future residents' carbon footprint and encourage them to not make more car journeys.
Okay. One thing I did notice in the report, you said walking distance to grocery store, and I just can't figure out which grocery store you're going to be shopping at. I went to the Hasty Mart today to look for groceries, and you got to go way to No Frills. It's not really walking distance in January, February, and March. So maybe that's just what everybody puts in their reports to all the councils. That's, you know, somebody really healthy other than me might do it, but
And through you, Mr. Mayor, I was going to say that one of my juniors, who's far younger than I am and probably in much better shape, assists on the reports and would likely have no trouble walking to the grocery store.
okay, thank you. I don't know what your plans with developer or developer's plans. Are there any affordable housing priced apartments in this development? Would you know?
Through you,
As
Mr.
defined affordable housing by Ontario government.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. At this time, there are not, but that's something that we have been looking at partnering with Niagara Regional Housing on other projects to see if there's a way for them to take ownership of some of these units to provide housing, and that way they are responsible for the units rather than us becoming the landlord, because the intent is that these units will be sold. And as you're aware, Niagara Regional Housing has a very large backlog of units, and there are ways to partner with these agencies to provide affordable units or provide housing for people who are in need.
Thank you for that answer. I appreciate that. But I'll talk about parking is, we've had our developments come, and I've always asked, what about the PSWs that come to service the apartment dwellers? There's no parking for 4 or 5 PSWs that come every day to the other local apartments in Colborne. And that is apartment because they have gear they have to carry up to the seniors. You do have accessible apartments, so it's telling me that people are going to need, say, PSWs once or twice a week maybe. So just take that under advisement. And the last point I'll make is it's just too bad the developer could make some sort of deal with the adjoining property owner. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Aquilino.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to the presenter. I am gonna talk about parking a little bit, sorry. In the event that the Seaway says a flat no to parking, do you have a plan B, or does your developer have a plan B?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at this point, we're being optimistic that we can get an agreement with the Seaway Authority. If the Seaway Authority comes back and says absolutely not, then we will have to look at a plan B or some other configuration, which I guess is still a plan B. But at this point, we have not put any other plans forward because this is what we feel is the best use of this property.
Okay. And then for the commercial units that front on to Main Street, is there any designated parking spots in the underground for the owners of those commercial buildings or those commercial units?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at this time, I don't believe there are, but that is something that we could look at.
I'm not trying to take away, I'm just trying to figure out if there's, if those have been allotted or they're strictly for the residents in the building. So,
through you, Mr. Mayor, the intent right now is the parking spots would be for the residential tenants.
okay. And then to your point that you made in regards to transit, it appears that all of the applications that are similar to yours that come to council come with a very reduced amount of parking spots, with the caveat that transit is available, but within the city of Port Colborne, as somebody who has to get to work every day, there's no way that I could rely on our transit. So I think it's very important that if you have 101 units available, that you have at least one spot per unit, if not more. And then to Councillor Bruno's point, visitors, like, are they part of the parking equation, or it's simply road parking?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So our intent as part of the agreement with the Seaway Authority that we are trying to get is that we would be meeting the minimums that the city is setting out. We just can't meet that minimum on our own property.
Okay.
So we would be providing the one space per unit plus additional spaces.
Okay. And just one more question, Mr. Mayor, through to you, David. If there's the holding provision that's put on this application in lieu of the Seaway agreement, and the Seaway agreement doesn't come through, what then happens to the application? Is it null and void, or?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, then they would actually have to come back and revise that zoning of the property.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, I was getting correction texts on my watch that there is commercial parking that has been allocated as part of the overall development.
David, how many parking spots are there in the municipal parking lot across the street from this at Humberston Hall, in behind and beside?
I don't have that number in front of me.
Okay.
I'd guess maybe 20, 25.
Might be a little bit more than that, but there is a public parking lot right across the streets. If you're talking about visitor parking, yeah. So just so you know. Okay. Any further questions? Oh, Eric, go ahead.
Through your worship to Ms. Larotte, this development would definitely bring the much needed housing to this municipality. We do need housing, as does most of the province. But as my colleagues have already pointed out, the issue of the 0.5 parking spaces is very difficult to support. I was doing some rough calculations in terms of numbering based on the site plan that was provided. It looks like based on our 1.25 parking spaces, is it the required parking spaces would be 126.25 parking spaces? Is that correct? Is that right?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that sounds correct, based on the 101
Okay.
units.
So I believe based on this, you're looking at 56 existing parking spaces staying, which are like the public, I believe, spaces. I'm including the one off of Main Street West and the parking closest to the park when you go onto Melby Ave. And then there's 61 proposed surface spaces. That would be if the Seaway were to enter into this agreement with you, and then 51 proposed, which is what you're requesting for the bylaw. So if you were to enter into an agreement with the Seaway, what you're proposing is 112 spaces. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Okay. So I think generally, if you were to come down to one parking space per unit, is I think a pretty general parking statistics. 1.25 seems to be a lot, and I know our official plan is a little bit behind in that. So going down to one space, if we were to do that, you would have, so that'd be 101 units, 101 spaces. If you had the 112 spaces, you would then actually be up in spaces, if you will. But it all is dependent on the Seaway, which I really do hope that something can come to fruition in that regard. To you, David, can the city help facilitate discussions with the Seaway in terms of this application?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I know City economic development staff have been in contact with the property owner and the Seaway. I'm not sure where those conversations have ended up, but certainly our economic development staff can help facilitate and help where they can.
Okay.
Councillor, they are in constant contact with regards to this
Okay.
through ED.
Okay, good. And then just sort of to my colleague over here, to Councillor Aquilina, she talked about a plan B. Is there potential for above ground parking? Has that ever been discussed or thought about in terms of maybe, I don't know, maybe taking out a story and using it for parking purposes if it doesn't come to fruition with the Seaway?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, truthfully, we haven't had those discussions yet. We've put all of our eggs into the Seaway's basket, and hopefully we can work together to come to an agreement. Should that not happen, we will have to look at what option Bs are.
Thank you. Further questions? Great. Thanks, Ms. Norak. Our first delegate is Melissa Bigford Lofquist. Welcome, Melissa.
Thanks. Good evening. Melissa Bigford, Lofquist, and also speaking on behalf of my husband, Christopher Lofquist, 173 Chippewa Road, Port Colborne, Ontario. Mayor, members of council, and the gallery. I am speaking to you to address our concerns regarding application D140823, zoning bylaw amendment, and why it should be denied, especially concerning the site-specific amendment to reduce the minimum landscaped area, increase the maximum gross floor area, reduce the number of parking spaces to 0.5 spaces per unit, and establish a maximum building height of 25.9 meters. There is currently no parking available for retail stores and office space that will be located on the first floor of the building. There is no street parking on Main Street or Melby Avenue where our customers or employees are going to park. Lock 8, Gateway Park, is located on the island and runs along the canal from Main Street West down to the lift bridge on Melby Avenue. The park is part of the larger community trail system. It is one of the city's flagship parks and ranked as the city's second most popular park in the 2020 Parks and Recreational Master Plan. A recent study to residents put out by the City of Port Colborne described Lock 8 Gateway Park as an important green space that offers residents the opportunity to watch ships moving through the canal, have a picnic, enjoy an event, or bring your family to enjoy the playground or the Algoma Skate Park and BMX Park. The city was exploring updates to the park and looking for feedback on how residents use the park and see the space updated in the future. Nowhere did it say lease all the parking closest to the park for a 101-unit apartment building and remove the entrance off Main Street to local and tourist traffic to the park. The city's official plan states that the purpose of parks and open space hierarchy is to provide a wide range of recreational opportunities and ensure that each type of open space is situated to meet the needs of an immediate neighborhood, and that the existing system of interconnected parks and open space shall be expanded and enhanced utilizing the city's park and recreational master plan. Every effort shall be made to retain or acquire the maximum amount of land which available. Parks shall be distinctive and express the character of the area in which they are located, and parks should be framed by continuous street frontage whenever possible. Everything that is currently available at Lock 8 Gateway Park. Section 3.13.1 of the official plan provides parks and open space definitions, which inform the standards and design guidelines for the city and the general policies regarding the classifications of parks and open space, respectively. City parks, which Lock 8 Gateway Park is to provide city parks provide unique, specialized cultural, recreational activities oriented towards participation by all city residents and tourists. City parks may include active and passive indoor and outdoor programming and non-program casual use of all scale. Facility development should be integrated on each site as to minimize conflicting uses. City parks shall serve all residents of all neighborhoods throughout the city and also attract use from non-residents and tourists. City parks can include culture, rec, and civic facilities and unique landscape and should be located on major roads for greater accessibility. How does the removal and leasing of all the accessible parking and closure of the Main Street entrance align with the official plan? How does the removal of green space align with the official plan? Residential land use, such as the proposed, are permitted in the downtown commercial designation, but not in the R4 zoning at 174 at Melby, where the maximum building height is only 20 meters, not the proposed 25.9 meters. When Chestnut Park was approved to be turned into housing, it was promised and approved by council that a new park would be developed at Lockview Park before the removal of the neighborhood park at Chestnut. It's been over 2 years and nothing has moved forward with the installation of the new playground at Lockview Park, yet construction of the housing is well underway at Chestnut. I remind council of this because now my family, friends and family, and many others in the neighborhood now take our kids to Lock 8, the closest park our kids to utilize and play in. This proposal asks for a substantial reduction in parking for residents and visitors and the removal of green space around the park to accommodate the request. Also, a long-term lease of the current Lock 8 Gateway Park is required, which in no way should be granted. It is also asking for the removal of accessible parking located by the washrooms, as well as the existing current crosswalk path to the washrooms and park from the sidewalks and walking cycling path. The proposal only leaves 8 public parking spaces along the park, which are regularly used by CUA and city staff. If the city does approve this, who is liable and responsible for the maintenance of these leased parking spots? Who is responsible for snow removal of these leased parking spots? The entrance to the building main floor parking is through a city park, not a side street. How is this allowed? What will happen to the community events held at the park with the proposed restrictions and elimination of accessible and public parking? Why was the traffic study report not included in the report to council? The traffic study did not account for an increase and backed up traffic when the bridges are up or closed for maintenance. What is the true impact to the surrounding neighborhood traffic congestion when the bridges are up? Will development of the property create contaminated dust and soil runoff into the neighboring properties, but especially the park? Who will ensure proper disposal of the contaminated soil? We are deeply concerned with the proposal for remove green space, parking spots, and restricting access from Main Street for members of the community as well as visitors to Lock 8 Gateway Park. This proposed property is too large and is not compatible with the existing neighborhood. For the reasons stated above, the zoning bylaw amendment should not be approved. I also want to bring up a note that the City of Port Colborne Facebook page did not post the public meeting notice for tonight, which is normally done for any meetings ahead of time, and I'm not sure why it was, no notice was or link was posted. Thank you.
Council, any questions? Great, thanks, Melissa. With regards to the information on this location, any more speakers? Okay, seeing none. Anything to add, David?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one last note. If you wish to be notified of the approval of the zoning bylaw amendment, you must make a written request to the clerk. Only those persons and public bodies that give the clerk a written request for the notice of passing of a zoning bylaw amendment will be given notice. I will remind everyone that there is a sign-in sheet at the back of the room. If you haven't already done so, please feel free to sign your name. If you've submitted comments already, you don't need to re-sign the sheet because we have your information already, but just noting that there. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment and recommendation report will return to council at a future meeting. This concludes my portion of the public meeting. I will now turn it back to you, Mayor Steele, to close the meeting and receive the report for information.
Thank you. Any further questions to staff? Seeing none at this time, if I could have Development and Legislative Services Planning Division Report 2024-06 be received for information. If I could have Councilors Beauregard and Hoyle move that. Again, any further questions? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Next, we're on to item 4.2, the public meeting report for draft plan, red line revision, and zoning bylaw amendment for Rosedale Estates 2024-08, and we are noting Councillor Beauregard's conflict with this one, so we'll give him time to leave here. Okay, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. All right, the purpose of this meeting is pursuant to sections 34 and 51 of the Planning Act and to consider a red line revision to the draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment applications submitted by the applicant Joe Tomeno of Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of the owner Rosedale Estates Limited for the property known as 100 Oxford Boulevard. The zoning bylaw amendment proposes to amend zoning bylaw 6575/3018 to rezone the subject lands from first density residential, public and park, neighborhood commercial, and fourth density residential to a site-specific third density residential, R3, and public and park zone. The proposed red line revision to the draft plan proposes to revise the approved draft plan of subdivision to contain 131 single detached dwelling lots and 118 street townhouses for a total of 249 units, representing an increase from the currently approved 119 single detached lots and 57 apartment units, or 176 units. Notice of the public meeting was administered in accordance with sections 34 and 51 of the Planning Act as amended in Ontario Regulations 544/06 and 545/06. Notice of public meeting was circulated on December 19th to internal departments and required agencies, and notice was also circulated via mail to property owners within 120 meters. Meeting details have been provided along with the council agenda on the city's website and under current applications. As of the date of this meeting, staff has not received any adverse comments from internal city departments or required agencies. Comments have been received from the following members of the public: Dave Simpson, Kina Sepachurqua Spadinsky, Rob Legase, Gary and Loretta Schneider, and Bill and Helen Clark. And requests from the public include the following comments: wanting to see a fence installed along the south side of the property where the subject property abuts the existing Oxford Park. Would like to see that Oxford Park and the proposed park in the Rosedale subdivision remain separate, and would like to request that no direct access to Oxford Boulevard be made to this new subdivision, and would like to see that the access be reinstated for Highway 58. These comments have been provided to City Council and will be responded to in the future recommendation report. The procedure to be followed this evening will be to present Development and Legislative Services Report 2024-08, pass the meeting to the applicant to provide a presentation, hear any comments or questions of clarification from council to the applicant or planning staff, open the meeting to the public for comments, and announce the requirements under the Planning Act for written notice of passage of the proposed draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment. At this time, I'd like to present Development and Legislative Services Public Hearing Report 2024-08. Next slide, please. The lands surrounding the proposed development are zoned light industrial to the north, second density residential to the east, first density residential to the south, and residential development to the west. Next slide, please. The City of Port Colborne official plan designates the subject property as urban residential. Land uses in the urban residential designation include residential, neighborhood commercial, and community facilities and institutional uses. The official plan designation is not proposed to be changed as a result of this application. The majority of the subject lands are located within the city's built-up area, with a portion of the lands in the designated greenfield area. A minimum of 50 people and jobs per hectare is generally required for lands within the greenfield area, and the proposed development achieves a density of 52.24 people and jobs per hectare. The application will be evaluated against policies surrounding designated greenfield areas, as well as the general policies of the urban residential designation when the recommendation report comes forward. Next slide, please. The zoning bylaw amendment proposes to amend the zoning bylaw to rezone the subject lands from first density residential, or R1, public and park, neighborhood commercial, and fourth density residential to a site-specific third density residential, or R3 zone, and public and park zone. Next slide, please. The site-specific amendment proposes to include special provisions requesting reductions to the minimum lot frontage, lot areas, front and side yard setbacks, and landscaped areas. Next slide, please. As referenced previously, the proposed red line revision to the draft plan of subdivision proposes to revise the approved draft plan to contain 131 single detached dwellings lots and 118 street townhouses. And That is representing an increase from the currently approved 119 single detached lots and 57 apartment units. I've attempted to overlay the plan on the screen here. So the red is what is proposed currently. The black underneath, or gray, is what was previously approved for this application. So I tried to show kind of what is changing on the screen. At this time, Your Worship, I'd like to pass the floor to the applicant, Joe Tomeno, for a brief presentation.
Thanks, David. Welcome, Joe.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council, and staff. My name is, like you said, Joe Tomeno, Senior Planner with Upper Canada Consultants, and I'm representing Rosedale Estates Limited this evening. And I'd like to thank Mr. Schultz for his presentation explaining the application. I'll keep my presentation brief to highlight some of the higher points of this application and provide clarification on some of the aspects of this development as necessary, considering there's a long history here. Next slide, please. So I'll try to put the history of 36 years into 3 sentences here, and I'm sure there'll be some questions after. As you're aware, the subject lands have an extensive history, originally receiving draft plan approval from the Region of Niagara in 1988. Over the years, there have been several draft plan extensions. As of November 1st, 2023, the lands are now owned by the same ownership group of the adjacent Meadow Heights subdivision. Being the same ownership group will now allow both subdivisions to move forward in tandem. Also, being the same ownership group will allow the final engineering servicing drawings to be finalized, as both subdivisions are integrated from a servicing point. Next slide, please. Progress over the last 3 months. Over the last 3 months, good progress has been made since the ownership change of November 1st, 2023. Firstly, the submission of the subject zoning bylaw amendment and red line of the draft plan of subdivision application, including a completed and updated traffic impact study, was made. The required noise and archaeological studies are in progress and continue. Meetings have been held with city staff to finalize the servicing outlets to the north through the Stonebridge Industrial Park. The finalization of the servicing corridors are necessary for the subject subdivision as well as the Meadow Heights subdivision. Next slide, please. Changes to the plan. The first critical change is that the Ministry of Transportation, who has control over Highway 58, will no longer permit a road connection from this subdivision to Highway 58. That means 2 things. Firstly, it means that the subdivision plan needs to change to remove the road connection. And secondly, it means that this subdivision is now closely dependent on the development of the Meadow Heights subdivision. The second major change also relates to the Meadow Heights subdivision. In particular, the parcel of land now owned by Van John Paving immediately to the north of Meadow Heights subdivision on Stonebridge. At that time, when the Meadow Heights and Rosedale subdivisions were approved, the parcel was owned by the city. In fact, there wasn't a provincial approval for the water main and sewers to go through these lands. Due to the recent sale of these lands, a new agreement needed to be reached with Van John Paving to secure the servicing easements. So, based on those 2 major changes, the road connection, the servicing easement, the plan needs to be revised to move forward. As part of our resubmission, the city required an updated traffic study. RV Anderson Associates report concluded that the existing study area intersections have sufficient capacity to accommodate the anticipated traffic generated from the subject development site without the need for any further road modifications. Next slide, please. As we were making the major changes to the subdivision plan, access, servicing, we made additional changes to address or introduce new housing types for future residents. The revised plan shows 130 single detached dwelling units and 21 street townhouse block accommodating 118 units. And it shows a block for park purposes that's to be integrated with the park in the adjacent subdivision. It should also be mentioned that I know we've increased the residential units, but at the same time we removed the neighborhood commercial block. So there was a component that, so there is a neighborhood commercial block now on the Meadow Heights subdivision, abutting Elm Street. So the neighborhood commercial block has been taken out of this subdivision now. So that would compensate for some of the additional units that are being proposed. Next slide, please. The proposed zoning for the residential uses is third density residential site specific for both the townhouses and the single dwellings. The proposed zoning allows the residential uses to be integrated throughout the subdivision. And there's additional park zones included to recognize the stormwater management pond and the park and the new park. Next slide, please. Due to changes outside of the control of the developer, including highway access, servicing corridor issues, and direction from the province on housing types, densities, the original draft plan needed to be revised. The new owner has made significant progress over the last 3 months and is committed to making this development a reality. To move this forward, we ask Council to support the requested changes to the draft plan and the requested zoning bylaw amendments. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. I want to thank Council and invite any questions that Council has. I'm sure there will be a few.
Great, thank you, Joe. Questions, councillors? Councillor Aquilina.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the presenter. I'm glad that you acknowledged that this has been in the approval stages for 36 years. And in those 36 years, many things have changed. So I have a few questions in regards to the extension that was given to the, was it Rosedale group before it became limited? Oh, sorry. Yes, former owner. Part of that extension was to give more time for all of the studies, including the archaeological one, which my understanding from your report is not completed at this time. Is that not correct?
Correct.
Okay. So to me, the extension that we granted was to allow leeway to get all the studies completed, and the fact that that's not completed and new ownership took over before the expiry date, I'm not sure why another extension wasn't asked for.
Through you, Mr. Mayor.
But I'll let staff answer that.
Okay.
Councillor?
Through Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Aquilina. I don't know if Council recalls, but when this came forward for an extension back in 2022, there was an extension granted for 1 year, and then the option for the Director of Planning to be authorized to add another year on if a red line revision was submitted in that time frame prior to that. So the applicant has, over the last year or more now, they've attended a pre-consultation with the city to go over the application requirements for that, and also the Niagara region. The Niagara region is the one that does look over archaeological resources for the city, And they noted that the archaeological assessment, it will still be required, but it can be as a condition of the draft plan approval as it was previously. So it still would be a condition of the draft plan approval, if that answers your question.
Okay.
Counselor?
Okay, yes, that does. So the pre-consultations took place in 2023, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't have the exact date, but I think it was early 2023. Correct.
Okay. With the traffic study, because from what I was reading in the traffic study, like the only entrance on paper is the Oxford Drive. So how is that going to impact the residents on Oxford Drive when the development starts and all of the traffic is for construction is going through that roadway, right, Oxford?
Through you, Mayor. Mr. Mayor. The Meadow Heights subdivision will have to be built out sufficiently so the second axis connects into the Rosedale, so you'll have, before that subdivision is serviced, to go out to Oxford. So that the access to Elm Street will be completed before that. So there'll always be two accesses to the Rosedale subdivision.
Okay, so it's not just going to be impacting just Oxford Drive, there'll be a second one already installed?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes.
And does the traffic study reflect the new additional red line revisions, or is it from the previous?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the traffic study incorporates the new red line revision subdivision, so
Okay.
that's accurate.
Okay, so that's all I have for right now.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Bruno?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tomato, for your presentation. I'm just wondering if I could ask, Mr. Mayor, with your indulgence, Mr. Schultz, a question just for a baseline.
Yep,
To
yep,
get started.
go ahead.
Thank you. David, I just wanted to make sure my understanding and that of the gallery and the people that have emailed So in 1988, the draft plan was approved with a bunch of extensions, and it was based on 176 units, right? And so if the red line revisions and the approximately 40% increase in units was turned down, the draft plan previously approved and given extensions, that would stand and the developer owner could build that, or he could still ask for red line approvals maybe in that mix. I'm trying to get a concept of, is it because from my point of view, the mix is one thing, but the ceiling of 176 is important to me. So can it be both? Can 176 remain and the apartment building disappears and it's reconfigured? If this is defeated, the developer will only be able to build, unless he reapplies, the older plan, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruno, that is correct. If this is defeated, the old one will still stand for up until that lapsing date of, I think it's December 12th, 2024 this year. If council doesn't extend that further, then it would lapse and they would be at essentially square one. They could hypothetically come in for additional or different changes to the plan that don't result in an increase in the units. Maybe they just rearrange some roads to make sure that that entrance isn't there anymore and address the servicing concerns. That is a possibility, yeah.
Thank you. And just to set the baseline again, this application, when it was filed complete, will cause council planning to have to come back to this chamber at what meeting?
I'd have to double check that one. I had the other one in my head, but for some reason this one's escaping me, but I would guess early March as well. for the zoning portion of it. The draft plan portion is not subject to those Planning Act timelines where we have to issue a refund.
And on the red line, that's included in the,
Correct.
in the second portion, the zoning, or is it included in the base?
So the 90-day time frame only applies to the zoning application.
Okay. Which also causes the increased units, right? Or no?
Potentially, it does allow for different unit types, and hypothetically, there could be additional units. But until the draft plan establishes the lot fabric, that is really kind of what sets the unit count.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to also say that I know that was read out how many comments you had, but I had received some that I forwarded late in the day, and they may overlap, but I forwarded 18 comments, I believe, today, and there were one that was a phone call, which I didn't do. So it's not just the ones that you hear or is in the addendum, just to let the public know, and Mr. Toronto. If I could go to you, sir. So one of the things that I guess I wanted to speak to first before getting into the nitty-gritty is, so this is probably the most for a subdivision that I've had in terms of constituent concerns. And the second most in my career was for Meadow Heights. So I'm very concerned that some of the history, I guess, doesn't repeat itself in terms of, and I don't think you guys were involved, Joe, some of the engineering, some of the shots, some of the levels down at Apollo, that all happened. I'm hopeful that our checking and you guys there and more aware would alleviate that. Certainly, the concept of a 40% increase in the number of units is first and foremost on people's minds, as well as, well, they're connected, this access off of Oxford, and I understand there's the one through Meadow Heights. And I asked earlier in the day to our planner and on Friday if there was any planning reasons why a roadway into the new Rosedale or the existing Rosedale could not go into the industrial park through there and go out to Loyalist with the proper approved MTO intersection that's there. And I was told that would be allowable. So my first question to you is, has your developer spoken with any of the landowners on Loyalist Drive, and would they entertain a entrance exit there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. We haven't explored that option, but it might be permitted, but at the same time, mixing industrial and residential uses might not be a good idea.
The last part of what you said.
Now we'd be mixing residential and industrial uses together. And I'm not sure if that's something that I could accept or from a planning opinion or even staff.
I guess I can't comment on Port Colborne, but there's certainly some examples in Niagara Falls and other places where light industrial has had a pathway out to an existing street. In some cases commercial, in some cases light industrial. I don't know of any that were heavy industrial. It seems to me that, you know, if you took the sum total of the emails that I have, it's the entry and exit using Oxford Boulevard, a quiet street. Now, to the point of 36 years, there's been a plan that had those that traffic going, part of that traffic going through Oxford. However, this is the major concern here And I would look for you to speak to the developer, and I'd also ask at this point, because the people on Oxford and Hawthorne Heights are going to be meeting between now and the next public meeting. And I think they would like to have an opportunity at least to talk, if it's Mr. Caniff or yourself or someone from Kingsway or Rosedale, whatever the holdco is here. Could you take that back to them and ask if there could be a discussion happening with the residents? I know you didn't do, you're not required to do a pre-meeting. A lot of developers do that before they get to this stage. It's been successful in a couple of cases here recently in the city, and I'd ask if you could bring that back and see if that could happen.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I'll definitely speak to the owner about that request.
Thank you. Just back to this, Joe, on Oxford. So, it seems to me that a 40% increase to the existing plan also provides a lot of revenue to the developer. And I don't disparage anybody from trying to make more money or a living or maximize their investment. However, if you look at getting traffic, at least the majority of it, out of Oxford, some of it will obviously fall to Meadow Heights, to Meadowlark, out to Elm Street. But this is a problem that's key. You'll hear it from, I'm sure, everybody here, that has a solution, but it needs a willing seller and a willing buyer and some money. But I've sat around this table for a lot of years, and I've seen what's happened when new developments have had to go through old developments, and I've probably seen more debate and fret from my Ward 1 councillors with Westwood being built. That has 3 ways in and out. It wasn't really Westwood that was the real cause of that. It was the pushing out to Cement Plant Road, but they were connected. We couldn't get ahead of that game because everything east of I'll say Wood Drive was already built, and they were coming through there. This is an opportunity to head something off that I think will be problematic for people in Hawthorne Heights for years. Other than Portal Village, I know of no other subdivision that will have those two, that have only 2 egresses with this many units going through. And the issue is that it's avoidable, but it will cost some outside of the box thinking, and it will cost some money. And I would ask that that meeting takes place, and maybe there is a meeting of the mind. Now back to your plan. One of the things that is concerning there was the movement of the park. So I'm wondering, Joe, and maybe David has to weigh in, what can you tell us about that park? Will it be a bigger park compared to the one that was originally planned by Mr. Rotella? And will it eliminate the need for Oxford? And where was the park going to be for Meadow Heights?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So if you, I think there might be a plan in here. Yeah, if you look at the red line plan on the slide. Yeah, that slide. So the revised red line subdivision plan shows we position the park, I think it's shown as block, you can barely see it, block 153 and the northwest corner. So that park abuts the future park of the Meadow Heights subdivision, and it abuts the existing park in the Hawthorne Heights. So now you have linkage of all 3 parks together, so residents from all 3 developments can link into each park. That's how it strategically was located. So there is some rationale linking all the park space together.
So there was 2 and the microphone. So there was 2 one in yours, one in Rosedale and Oxford? Or was what was in Rosedale part of the Oxford Park?
There was always a park in the Rosedale, but we repositioned it now into that corner, linking the future park of Meadow Heights and the existing park of Hawthorne Heights. So all three are touching each other, so if there's any kind of trail system, you'll be able to link you're linking all three spaces together for the benefit of the residents.
Mr. Tamano, so what, and/or David, the traffic study, will that be released to the public? Will they be able to find it on the website? Was there any highlights of it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, all the reports are posted on the website. We typically don't attach them to the reports because they're large files and they really mess up the agenda, but if council desires, we can make that happen in the future. I will note that typically the planning report that's attached to the staff report does summarize those documents, so it at least allows you to know which documents have been submitted. But in the future, if you'd like, we can make sure that those are circulated to council through the regular circulation as well.
It'd be nice to have it as an attachment, but it's really, some people will want it, some people won't. Sorry.
Yeah.
Not necessary at this time. I'm going to pass this on to my colleagues or the gallery and perhaps come back after some of those comments have been made. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Elliott.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the presenter, Gary had asked a couple of the questions that I was thinking of. The one that jumped out at me, though, is you spent all this time getting together the plan of subdivision, and then with all the units in place, and then at the last minute, it's a 40%. I calculated to about 43 point something, but that's not significant. So why the 40% increase at the last minute?
Mr. Tamano?
So, through Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, well, if you look at the overall density of the subdivision and the policy direction that the policy of the province and the region, looking at a minimum of 50 people jobs per hectare. So this development just falls right in the minimum of 52 people jobs per hectare. So we're at bare minimum for policy for direction from the province and the region regarding density. So we're in that density that's acceptable, or for these type of plan new communities. Granted, the draft plan of 1988 was designed completely different than the new subdivisions that are being designed now. So this plan of subdivision as designed is consistent with the plan of subdivisions that we're designing now and following the direction from the province and the region regarding densities and housing types.
So I'll take it that prior to the 40% increase, you didn't meet the density targets?
Correct. But that plan is from 1988, correct?
Okay. So I'll go through, Mr. Mayor, to David. Staff had no issue with that when you were in discussions to
Through
okay, the
Mr.
plan
Mayor,
of subdivision, that the density wasn't where it should be?
because it was already an existing approved draft plan, there aren't any required changes that are being made, but because this is a new revision to the application, we do want to bring it in line with current policies. Okay. So that's kind of where Joe is coming from. I think there was an opportunity to increase the unit count here and some additional houses.
Okay, thanks. Just a couple of quick questions too on the provisions and the reductions that you're asking for, which kind of jumped out at me. minimum lot area is going from 400 square meters to 300 square meters. Now, if you just look at that, you're thinking it's 100 square meters. But for old people like myself, that's 1,000 square feet of a lot gone. Your minimum front yard is reduced, side yard. And the other one that jumped out at me is the maximum lot coverage went from 50% to not applicable. So how does that happen? How do we go from 50% lot coverage to now it's not applicable? And I'll wait for yourself or for staff.
Mr. Schultz?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the intention of that, and I'll let Joe jump in as well, but there are setbacks that still need to be maintained, which does require that area to not be covered by the building, as well as the minimum landscaped area provisions in the bylaw. So there's no scenario where the building can take up the entire lot. I think it's just, I'll let Joe jump in as well, but I think the intention is that that provision, it would just further cap the restrictions on the site. So they would like to go with the setbacks.
Can I just jump in, Joe, before, just real quick? But lot coverage just isn't the main building, right? It's secondary buildings as well. So you could build like a massive shed in your backyard that took up your whole backyard because there's no limit. Correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there are limits on accessory buildings as well.
Okay, but it says maximum lot coverage. It's not applicable.
So that's for the main dwelling. There are additional requirements for accessory buildings that do have additional requirements for lot coverage. So those, at least as how I see it isn't being changed through this amendment.
Mr. Tomato, anything to add?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor. To the councillor, David is correct. The intention is that the setbacks will take care of the coverage. And considering the smaller lot sizes, that we don't see a need for a lot coverage requirement, because your setbacks are going to dictate the spacing between dwelling units. So you can never get probably much higher than 50%. But some of the new zoning bylaws that we work with, they don't have lot coverages, they just have setbacks. And regarding accessory dwellings, I think there's a provision that can only be a certain percentage. So,
because I'm sure that there were other people that noticed that and jumped off the page and said, wait a minute, what are you going to do? I guess, and picking up what Councillor Bruno had said, with regards to parks, with a 40% increase in units and smaller lot size, providing area for kids to go and play, because a lot of these lots are going to be fairly small. Large park is in the plans with basketball nets, tennis courts, or soccer field, or anything to that effect, because this is a large build out on both sides, on both developments. So to have some areas for kids to get out and be able to play other than the streets would probably be more beneficial to the people that are living there. So your thoughts on that?
Mr. Tomato?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor. Well, two things here. One, there was some thought that went into the smaller size of the park, but we're linking the three parks together, and both of those parks are sufficient, are fair size. And then you have, in addition to park space, the smaller park, you're getting the other monies on the park and lieu on each building permit. So those funds can go towards building that infrastructure into those parks. So you can address it. I mean, the money's there through each building permit.
Just, Mr. Tomato, just for context with regards to this, because I know our public works staff have discussed this, where we're not putting a whole ton of parks right next door to each other, where we would rather have a larger park. For context for the councillor, can you talk about the size of the Meadow Heights park that was originally looked at for the original subdivision next to Rosedale. Because in reality, if you kept the same park, you would have had two large parks beside each other, where you've now funneled it into the existing Meadow Heights design, which has a fairly large park, what I saw on the diagram. Just, can you give us an idea of the size of that park?
I don't know the exact size, but the intention of the location of that park was to link some kind of trail system into the two parks. So there's a linkage there so the residents can get there easily. But that, I don't know the size of that, but it is a fair sized park, and I'm not sure the acreage.
David, do you have anything to add there? Because I know planning has been talking to Public Works with regards to that issue.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I just did a rough calculation of that. That park block is about 4 acres.
Okay? Just, I think it gives good context what's there.
Yeah.
Further questions? Further questions, councilors? Councilor Hoyle?
Through the mayor to the presenter, I'm glad you let us know that it was the ministry that acts that route onto 58. But I do have concerns with not having another entrance to that area, and not just for even the safety as a retired firefighter for apparatus. Dave, do we have any property still that connects to Stonebridge Drive, roughly in that area, or could you find out at some point?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't believe so. I know we did own some property further east, but I believe the ones that are kind of abutting Rosedale here have been sold.
Yeah, I'm just looking for another way to alleviate some of the volume that's going to have, because if you look at, well, if anyone drives around Oxford Boulevard, I did, and there's going to have to be some major upgrades to most of the infrastructure there to support this development, because you're going to a new development that has all the new stuff and everything, and then you're going to Oxford. I mean, it's a small road. I went there, and like, there's going to have to be, the city's going to have to invest in some,
Or the developer.
to major improvements there, and then access on 58 there. I mean,
Now, there's two landowners on Stonebridge that abut this.
yep.
One is Van John, which there's an easement over for the water and sewer servicing. And then there's another owner, which I can't remember the fellow's name, but to the east of Van John, the partially built building. So, and I think that's a question that Councilor Bruno asked Mr. Tomeno, if they could
Yeah, that's what.
have the owner talk to those two owners and see if they can.
Try to make another access
Yeah.
road
So-
volume way.
Let's leave that with Mr. Tomeno, because he answered Councilor Bruno with that. So,
And besides that, the rest of the councilors took all my questions.
yeah. Any further questions for this side? No? Further questions, guys? Yeah, Councilor Bruno?
Through to David. I get that the province has changed these rules, but, I think we've got to remember as a council, and I don't know where planning can fit in on that, on the human side of this, is, you build a new development and it's got all that extra density in it. People walk in with their eyes wide open, knowing what they've got. That density goes up in a giant greenfield place, and it's there. This is an as-built subdivision, and we're increasing this flow by 43%, providing no extra entrances. If you look at the gradient of the land, not a lot of people are going to use metal arc. I mean, the thing I wanted to bring up, Mr. Mayor, is that why this is so important to get things to loyalists is that people being people, they're all going to use Oxford to go to Welland. If they want to go to the other end of Port Colborne, are you going to snake through Meadowlark Lane, get on Slow-Mo Elm Street, get behind a transport truck, cross Main Street, do a couple lights. No. You're also going to go at Oxford. You might even go if in the lower half of Meadow Heights to get out there, take West Side Road right to Kalali and get downtown. Like this will pale in comparison to what's happened in other places, like what's happened at Clarence Street in Stanley. And they have 3 entrances in and out of there. And I wouldn't want to see what's happening here happen to the development off of Christmas and that. If all of a sudden somebody comes in at the end of the day and says, oh, by the way, we want to do this plan and increase it by 40%. Like, I just really think we have to get down to think about the people that are left there. If this was a new subdivision, you wanted to put that density in, you had 2 ways out, well, then everybody going into that subdivision knows what's going on. But here, like 40%,
Questions,
Joe,
Counselor?
you need to talk.
Counselor,
Yeah,
questions,
that's the question. Joe, you need to talk to your owner and the people on Loyalist, because this is a disaster. Thank you.
Thanks, Counselor. Further questions? Yep, Counselor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through to David, could you send us the overlay that you have, please?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay. No further questions? Thanks, Mr. Tamano. Our first delegation is Joanna Iwanicki. Welcome. Yep. Name and address.
Sorry?
State your name and address.
My name is Joanna Iwanicki, and I live on 20 Oxford Boulevard.
Thank you.
So I am the owner and resident of the house on 20 Oxford Boulevard, and I'm directly affected by the new subdivision plans. My main concern with the proposed subdivision is that the traffic flow in and out will be through Oxford. I'm aware of the 2 additional roads of Elm Street, but by default, these 2 are going to be less popular, as the Oxford-Windsor route is the quickest access to Highway 58. To consider the 2 other access roads as equal to Oxford is absurd, because no one is going to go backwards and choose to navigate the maze of Meadow Heights to get out. So the traffic volume numbers predicted in the document that was sent, that is posted on the city website, are not true, because most traffic will funnel through Oxford. The other problem that is directly connected to the one above is that there are no proposed improvements to the intersection of Windsor and Highway 58. As of now, it is already a challenge to turn left during the morning peak hours. With the increased volume of traffic, it will be plain dangerous, as it will create a pressure onto the first in line to make a turn when it may not be safe to do so. To add to the danger, the speed limit on this section of the highway is 80 kilometers per hour. And what about the street itself? What are the plans in regards to the lighting, sidewalks, and speed bumps? It is a fairly long, straight stretch of the road, and sometimes cars are already speeding here. I'm scared to think what will happen when the street is extended. The problem with this new subdivision is not the development itself, it is the high density of it and the traffic volume it is going to create on our existing streets. My request and proposal is to keep the Rosedale development separate from Hawthorne Heights and close off the access to Oxford Boulevard, or go back to the original plan. Also, in the document I read about the proposed multi-use trail multiple times. It's mentioned multiple times in the document that connects all the future and existing parks. Where is the trail marked on the draft? I never could find it. And I also have a personal question in regard to my property. On the plans, I see 4 backyards that are adjacent to the side of my property. It is way different than having a one neighbor on each side. Is there a plan to build a privacy fence? If so, what kind and how high? My backyard is already fenced, so will this section be demolished and replaced with a new one to unify the look? And I will need a written answer to this, please. Thank you for your time and to listen to my concerns.
Great, thank you. Questions to the presenter? Seeing none? Great, thank you. Got it. Further comments by anyone? Yep. Just press the red button, name and address, and just remind you of your 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, I won't need very long. Dave Simpson, 12 Oxford. I've been told by council that if this new amendment gets turned down, right, the extra 40% more, or what have you, that the plan would just go back to the original approved plan. How can this be since the access to the 58 has been removed? How can you go back to an original plan when an access has been removed? That's pretty much what I got.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thanks.
Can David answer?
Yeah, David, councilor's asking for an answer to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, certainly, like, the original plan will still stand should this one be denied. But that entrance would still need to be worked out through the MTO through either a permit or the plan would still need to be revised. So at the end of the day, I guess the answer would be it wouldn't be able to go forward as is.
Okay, Councilor Aquilina?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to David. Earlier you said that if it reverts back to the original plan, that plan expires in December 2024. So if we don't approve that expiry or extend that expiry, then the applicant would have to start a whole new process, correct?
David?
That would be correct, yes.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. I saw a hand up, go over here. Yeah, come on up. Yep, name and address.
Hello, hi, my name's Amanda. My address is 694 Steele Street. I know I don't live in that area, however, I'm here speaking on behalf of my wonderful parents that they do actually live at 17 Oxford Boulevard. I know maybe some of you have a map, but 17 Oxford Boulevard is right here. It's actually right across the street from the first lovely lady that spoke. So basically, thank you for having me here tonight. Thank you. I just want to preface by saying that I'm here opposing the throughway onto Oxford. So I'm not going to address Windsor Terrace itself or Thorncrest. I know you guys matter, obviously, but I'm just talking about the small community of Oxford. So obviously the city's, well, this developer's trying to pass the throughway road. I'm sure that's all our biggest concern at this point. So first I'd like to just talk quickly about the size of the community, like in terms of land. It's over 4 times the size of just the small Oxford. Like when I'm talking, I'm just saying like just Oxford. So this land in size, it's 4 times larger than what's there now. And in terms of residential volume that's going to be there, it's going to be 16 times the size. 16 times the size. Yeah, so you're going to have 16 times the traffic. Imagine that. Imagine that, 16 times the traffic coming through Oxford. Imagine in your communities, 16 times the traffic. Okay, so currently on Oxford, there's roughly 40 residents, okay? And there's slated to be 642 residents Like, okay. It's just, and that could even be an understatement, because you guys know how developers are. You know, it's always underestimated. It always is. So it could be even slated to be more than that. It's not logical to expect the current residents to tolerate this influx of 16 times the traffic. It's just not, it's not logical. Moreover, it's not ethical for this developer to place the perceived dangers and risks of this influx onto the community that's there. It's comprised of seniors and families, young families with children. As a paramedic who serves this community, I'm a paramedic who works in Port Colborne. I have major concerns about this, okay? Turning Oxford into a through road with 16 times the traffic, major concerns. Tim, I'm sure you hear me as a retired fire. I have concerns also as a paramedic. Many of the residents on Oxford have lived there for decades, some even their whole lives. And others, like my parents, they've recently moved to Oxford solely because it's on a quiet, safe cul-de-sac. That was the biggest appeal for them. To rough runshod over your loyal residents of Port Colborne purely for the sake of the developer's profit margins and convenience is really disgusting. I'd like to bring your attention to page 102 of the meeting agenda. I realize you probably don't have it in front of you, but that's perfectly fine because I'm here to read it for you. So on page 102, we have single detached zoning provisions. This is going to be interesting. So we have required. So minimum lot frontage, and this is for the single detached zoning. Minimum lot frontage required 12 meters, proposed 10.9 meters. We have minimum lot frontage corner lot, required 15 meters, proposed we have 12.7 meters. Big surprise. Minimum lot area, we have 0.04 hectares, proposed 0.325. We have minimum front yard, required 6.5, proposed 6. Minimum corner side yard, 3.5, proposed 3. And then again, maximum lot coverage, required 50%, proposed not applicable. There we go again. There's more. I'm not going to waste my time reading it all. So clearly, this developer is violating the city's required minimums in order to maximize their profits. You don't get to funnel this traffic through Oxford, and especially not for your convenience and your profits. Like that's just, yeah, it's not good. So by this point, you might be thinking, but Amanda, what do we do, right? How do we fix this? So glad you asked. So glad you asked. I do believe, indeed, I do have a proposal for council. So ultimately, I'm completely opposing the through road, making Oxford a through road. I completely oppose that. But if you, for whatever reason, had to do it, and no offense, Joe, sorry, I know I'm ripping into you, but I'm proposing something kind of like this. So you would essentially close off Oxford. You could, I guess, create your through road should you have to, and then you would close it off with a gate of this type of a thing. I'm sure we've all kind of seen them. As a paramedic, I've seen these multiple times. The city has access, the fire department would have access should you need to, for whatever reason, get through. It also could look something like this. And this is obviously just if you had to. I completely oppose the through road altogether, but they're going to do ultimately what they want. So this would ultimately be a compromise as well. Yeah, so I would say that I would be willing to compromise with that. And that's, you wouldn't have to sacrifice the safety of the residents there. You wouldn't have to subject them to the influx of traffic. So yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you.
No problem.
Oh, don't leave. Please, please, guys, we got to follow rules. There's no outbreaks, clapping, cheering, booing, whatever it is. Thank you. Just last name, Amanda?
Volpatti.
Okay, thanks,
Yeah.
Amanda.
Yeah.
Questions from council? No questions? No? Good. Thank you, Amanda. Appreciate it. Any further comments? Yeah, I've got the second lady in the back that put her hand up first. Come on up. Flip a coin? Okay. That's fine. Again, full name and address, please.
My name's Lisa Brownrigg. I live at 5 Oxford, and I obviously do oppose the through traffic. Back in 1970, when our community was built, we were built as a country living, is what they called it. And when I asked my neighbor who used to work here at City Hall what that meant, she said, oh, we have no sidewalks. We have no street lights, and all the hydro poles are in the back of the yards for a reason. And I thought, yeah, I always wondered about that. This neighborhood never had sidewalks, but it's such a small, tight community. Everybody walks their dogs and their kids, pushes their strollers. It's not a problem. She says, yeah, it's all really respected really well. There's no speed bumps. That's going to change. 249 houses being built for us, and I'm not a math wizard. If it was 1 car per household, that's 250 cars going up and down Oxford, because we all know that's the route they're going to take. Most households have 2 cars. So now we're talking 500 cars. We have 13 houses on Oxford. So not only are you reshaping the way we have to live in our community now, which of course we don't mind being flexible, but this is beyond flexible. You're asking the people on Oxford Boulevard and Hawthorne Heights to change their whole lifestyle because of a subdivision that wants access through Oxford. I don't oppose at all having emergency access to Oxford Boulevard through a gated suggestion. That was a great idea. I think that's amazing to think outside the box, but we do not have to subject, and we should not have to subject our current lifestyle for 500 cars on a daily basis, not to mention our safety. How are we going to change? I mean, this isn't a big deal for some people, but we've got little kids in our street. How are they going to learn to ride their bikes in between speed bumps, in between traffic? How are we going to walk our dogs? How are we going to push our baby strollers? This is a part of life that we've enjoyed at this center where we are. This community has always been looked at and valued as a small, little, gated community, quiet. We like that lifestyle. We're now getting pushed into another era that we don't care if there's a subdivision being built. We've already listening to it going on behind us. That's fine. But honestly, the traffic and the safety that the community is going to be put at risk it's an accident waiting to happen, and it's going to be detrimental. That's all I have to say.
Okay, questions from councillors? Sina, thank you. You're next. Again, full name and address.
Hi, my name's Shannon Haley. I live at 8 Oxford Boulevard. My parents built the house that I live in on the street. I've been there for 52 years now. So it's all these people, I've grown up knowing half of them. We haven't had the volume that goes through our neighborhood. It's been a quiet, lovely neighborhood where kids can run free on the streets. We can walk our dogs. We have no sidewalks. We have no street lights. And now you're going to put all these extra houses with connecting parks that are going to bring all these new kids into our neighborhood, which I have no problem with kids in our neighborhood, but we have no sidewalks. We have no street lights. All this extra traffic going up and down our streets with all these extra kids, like, where's the safety issues? Like, this is a huge safety issue for our neighborhood. So I'm strongly opposed to the access to Oxford Boulevard. I'm not opposed to the development. We have things that Park Colborne needs to grow. But if we can keep it going off onto Elm Street and through Stonebridge Drive somehow, it obviously would be ideal just for the safety of all of our residents in our neighborhood.
Okay, just before I leave, questions from council? Sina, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any further comments or questions? Yep, come on up. press the red button and your full name and address.
Oh my God, okay, you guys.
No, you're over the side, yeah.
My name's Stacy Clark. Shannon, you've dared me, I'm doing it. We're not even spoken. I'm stunned that I'm up here, but I have to speak. 22 Thorncrest. I'm here with we're all neighbors, like so many of us. We feel very passionate about Hawthorne Heights. It's a gem in our city. We don't, it's not that we begrudge people having new housing, but we know what it's like to have a really good neighborhood that shouldn't be compromised. And it was designed in a certain way that a lot of us feel will be diminished if we open it up. And we have an adjacent neighborhood, and people did mourn the loss of trees behind them on Runnymede and the privacy that we felt. This was designed as a really good neighborhood. And having all these houses abutting, people on Oxford, thanks for speaking up. I mean, we're compromising the privacy that these families worked to enjoy. How would you feel if you had a country property and suddenly you had 5 neighbors next to you just because somebody wanted to develop? I felt that the idea of having a high density just because the province wanted it, it didn't match up with where we live. We live on the edge of town in a rural area. We don't need 52 people per hectare. I mean, come and see how beautiful it is to have a normal neighborhood in Hawthorne Heights, and please respect the fact that it can be that good in Ontario. We don't have to have all these crammed in mansions to have a good life. You can actually spread out in Port Colborne and have a lower density and enjoy the life that Ontario thought was going to be good. And so every time I hear someone say that it's going to happen, I really feel that we need to change our verbiage, because none of us really do want it to happen wedged in between an industrial road and the edge of the escarpment. It would be so nice just to have a little bit of green space extended into the city. Don't you find it beautiful when you drive into Port Colborne and you see the fields and you come up that escarpment? We used to have trees along the escarpment and it felt like a natural area. Those are being culled. It made me sad. A lot of us did not want to see, when we came up the hill, that we could see all the way to Elm Street. Those are being cut down. Everything feels so presumptuous, and I think it's because we know how great it could be, and I wish more people and developers in Ontario understood what it means to live in a small town where we have breathing space, green space. We love forests, we love the country. It's not a problem, it's not wasted space. It should be that way. That's what I wanted to say.
Oh, before we leave, just a sec.
Yes,
Thank
what
you.
to say.
No problem. Questions, councillors?
Oh.
Questions? Oh, Councillor Bodnar?
How about a comment?
Questions, sorry. You can
Okay.
comment after when the motion comes forward.
I'll make a question to you. Why were you afraid to come up here and speak before here? This is a great example of why people should get up here. You did a wonderful job.
Thanks, Ron.
And, you know, if you're sitting in the audience and you haven't heard what you want us to hear, get up here and say something. It's just, none of us are experts in anything, so, you know, don't be afraid to do it. You did a great job.
Thank you. And you know what? It is intimidating to know that this is being televised and anyone can watch it. Any word that we say in defense of our little neighborhood can go to the worldwide. These are our private lives. We have a neighborhood here that we chose because we like quiet and private. So it's a lot to ask of us to have to stick up for ourselves. And thank you. Yeah. Thanks.
Maybe tomorrow somebody asks you for the autograph because they see you on TV.
All right.
You never know.
Just turn
Anyways, thank you.
Thanks.
Further comments or questions? Yep, come on up. Good job, Ron.
Did I start something? Sorry.
My name is Andrew Spazinski. I live at 15 Oxford Boulevard. My wife and I, we just moved there 2 years ago, and specifically chose that neighborhood for all the same reasons that everybody has been talking about. It's quiet. We just had our first child. She's 1.5 now, so she's going to be learning to ride her bike. We have a dog. So obviously, echoing what everybody has said, my biggest concern is that access to Oxford Boulevard and the amount of traffic that's going to be there now. We don't have sidewalks, so right now, if we want to walk with our kids or our pets, and there's access through there, like we can't. There's going to be nowhere. There's no. I have a couple questions. Can I ask a question to the planner? Is that? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So on that map or whatever, it says the density is based on 2.9 people for a detached and 2.1 people for a town. And so that's what's giving you your number for how many people are going to be living in that neighborhood. Like, I don't know if anybody has seen like townhouses in Welland, Niagara Falls. Like, it's way more than 2 in one of those townhouses. So I just think that even any of the numbers that you're talking about with cars and everything like that is going to be significantly higher. And then with regards to when you guys are talking about something that has already been approved, and because there's not going to be access to 58, like reverting back to something else, when was that plan approved?
David?
Through Mr. Mayor, it was approved in 1988.
Okay, because we, like, obviously when we were looking into buying in this area, we contacted, Chris Room, is he like still or used to be? So we emailed him on May 25th of 2022 with regards to asking about what was going to be happening in that area, because we saw them starting to cut down to the bush and whatever. So if it's okay, I'm just going to read what he replied to us. Hi, Kina, that's my wife. As of right now, planning staff have not received an application for any homes to be built on the property. A subdivision agreement was entered into in the 80s, I believe. However, the conditions were never met and the agreement lapsed, so the process needs to be started again. From what I understand, there are still a ways away from making a complete application, though. If you have any questions, please let me know. So I'm just confused where, if now that there can't be access to 58 and if you guys don't approve whatever and we have to revert to a plan, like, that's 30 something years ago that was approved. Like, it feels like even reverting back to that is like, seems kind of crazy to me that can be allowed to happen.
Answer for that, David?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yeah, I think it's fair to say that the plan would have to change regardless, just based on that new access point. It would have to be redesigned, okay. Likely, yeah.
And then you guys, the developer's representative was referencing the park, the existing park that's on Oxford, like behind the other side of the road of me. Mm-hmm. That's owned by the city of Port Colborne right now?
Yes.
And would that be sold to the developer for them to, so when he's talking about that little tiny corner park that's up there, being connected to that park, like, would he be then, because right now on that park, I don't know if you've been there, like, it's bush and there's one swing set. So, like, are they talking about, like, building more like a tennis court or just more of a playground there? And then is that the city of Port Colborne building that or the developer building that?
No, it would be money from the sale of the lots. When those lots are finally built on, there's a dollar value that goes to the city for parkland across the city. But that's why I asked the question earlier. So, quite frankly, the city doesn't want all these big parks all sitting next to each other.
Right.
So it was David that figured out the new park that's in the current Meadow Heights subdivision is about 4 acres.
Okay.
This original subdivision was actually designed before Meadow Heights was even an inkling in everybody's eye.
Yeah.
It had a big park in it.
Okay.
So instead of having all these big parks that are next to each other, our staff were like, no. But having those subdivisions connect through green space, which is done in a lot of places in town and elsewhere, would be the fact that this subdivision would connect through that shrunk green space into either a passive park, which is Oxford, or into a full-fledged park, which is Meadow Heights.
Right,
That's how that would work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, just to point out, obviously, obviously the request is being made to revise, the minimum frontage. And then also how much space between, the road and the house, I think is asking to be reduced a little bit as well. So all that means is your driveway, in this new subdivision, your driveway is going to be smaller. Everybody has 2 cars, I think, 2 or 3 cars. So another concern of ours is that now overflow parking, because my parents lived in Tallgrass, which is in Chippewa, right by the arena there. Same thing. The overflow parking that happens when you have no room to park in your own area is that it's going to flood into the surrounding areas, and so that's also a concern of ours. So yeah, just in general, opposed to it, but thank you very much.
Great. Just a second, Andrew. Any questions? Great. Thank you. I had another hand up right here. Come on up.
Good evening. My name is Stefan Masetta. I'm the husband of Amanda. I live at 694 Steele Street, and I am the in-law of her family who lives on Oxford. My point's very simple. I just want to illustrate that many of the people who live in Oxford made the decision to do so, that it was a quiet neighborhood with limited traffic, and that the developer is proposing a throughway which is going to increase the traffic to an unacceptable amount and change the living style of those people who are currently living there on Oxford. If there is no access to 58 from that development, which has people packed in like sardines into the maximum amount of profit that can be generated from that many people living in a small lots of housing and such, it's simply not fair to expect the people of Oxford to put up with over 200 to 300 cars passing through multiple times a day. That's the only point I wanted to make and reiterate. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Thank you. Anything else? No, sorry, you get one chance. I apologize, you get one chance. Yes, ma'am. It's on.
Oh, thank you.
Name and address.
Hi, I'm Loretta Schneider. I live at 12 Windsor Terrace, and I do know that David Schultz, the mayor, and everyone here received an email on my husband and Gary and my behalf. I don't really want to touch on all of the issues that I brought up in the email because I know you'll have a chance to look at it and digest it. And some of the points are already brought up tonight by my fellow neighbors. But there's just one thing that I just want to make sure of that is brought up that I did not put in the email, and that is when we're talking about the traffic, and a lot of it's talking about Oxford, but really it's going to impact the whole subdivision. I live on Windsor Terrace, and the thing is, if this development goes through and the traffic does flow along, I wouldn't say flow, but if it moves along Oxford Boulevard, right now, the way it is with 80 homes in Hawthorne Heights, right now, I don't always use Windsor Terrace, and I live there. I go through Hawthorne Boulevard quite often. It's not always that easy to get out onto Highway 58, so I very simply travel through along Runnymede and the rest of the roads through the subdivision. So what's going to happen here is, as you're going to find people move along Oxford, they're not going to stop and always want to turn right. They're actually going to run through Windsor Terrace and Runnymede and Hawthorne Boulevard to try to get out of the subdivision. So I just want to let you know that there will be much more congestion, and there'll be a lot more traffic flow, not just at Windsor Terrace and Oxford, but also throughout the whole subdivision, because that is presently how it is used now. And I do know in the email that I sent to everyone that you know that there are only 80 homes. We're very fortunate, but that was a planned rural subdivision in its planning, and it's good planning. And we are safe to walk and do what we do on our narrow streets because there are only 80 vehicles or 80 homes with vehicles that are moving in and out of that subdivision. At present, we don't have anyone else coming in or coming out, unless of course you're visiting, but basically that's what it's for. So I do believe that many people are opposed to such a high density proposal trying to mix in with a low-density area that is designated rural. And for that reason, I just wanted to bring up that point that I didn't hear tonight, that it will be affecting the whole subdivision. And now that I'm finding out that the parks now are attached, somehow, I'm not quite sure either, that our subdivision in its planning and the way it's lived for over 50 years was never really meant to handle such traffic and populace. So thank you very much. I just want to make a point to thank all of the council members and the mayor, and for those that serve the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just 1 second. Questions? Councillor?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to build on something Loretta said, because I forgot it in my earlier comments. Your point's well taken, we talked about it, but just to add to that, when we were doing the issue on Coronation Drive, the whole issue there was you can't get out on 58. Yeah. And so they were cutting through Corvette, Merritt Parkway, and that. So, you know, this is similar, but I think more pronounced. That intersection will probably get a light. It's unlikely that this, before the escarpment, is going to get a light at Oxford and 58. So now when you come out in the morning and you see 3 cars in front of you trying to get on 58, you're going to go left, and you're going to go Hawthorne, Thorncrest, Hawthorne Boulevard, all of that. So, you know, I think that's an area that we probably didn't talk about, because anybody here, Mr. Mayor, on those streets is probably watching at Zoom. And yes, it doesn't directly affect them, but it will. But I just wanted to add the other volume issue, and I would think we can check that out with the traffic, is the inability to perhaps even put a light there by the MTO. Thank you.
Something David can ask. All right, thank you.
Mr. Bruno, also, just was going to mention, because we have such narrow roadways, right now with the traffic that we have now, it can handle it. But when you bring in that influx of 249 homes plus whatever, if Meadowville traffic comes through as well, what happens is our roads are very narrow. They're very just single roads. Mm-hmm. So what's going to happen is you don't have any way to bypass or pass each other. So it's going to really cause a very high safety issue that I'm really concerned about for all of the citizens and all the residents that not only use our neighborhood, but future ones that may be coming through it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further comments? Great, thank you. Once the motion's on the floor, yeah. Any further questions to staff before I go back to David? Is it a question? Okay, you can ask a question to staff, yeah.
Earlier it was brought up that there may be a contribution by the developer for some of the infrastructure things. So David, I'd like to know if you could find out, you know, I've seen it where, and I understand it to be true, if you could correct me if I'm wrong, that when you have to upgrade a pump station or a main or a line caused by the development, that the subdivider developer has to contribute to that. I'm not so sure, because when we've talked about sidewalks before, this recently came up on Main Street, whether, you know, connecting to existing sidewalks is a responsibility of the developer to get his residents out. So I would like to find out if, under the Planning Act, Oxford would have to be upgraded, who would pay for it, and if the developer does not have to pay for it, if we could find out some kind of estimation of cost to change that road. Because I think that the you know, what might lie under the surface of all this is this 74 may tip that over the edge in terms of flow. And I don't know if that has to intersect with your traffic study. Like at a certain level, it needs this kind of road, but I'd like you to look into that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay,
thanks. I made a note of that. Thank you.
Questions?
After you do your thing there, will I get a chance to talk to staff, or should I do it now? Ask a question to Dave.
No, you can ask questions now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Dave, the first lady that spoke and had the 4 homes that are now going to back onto the side of her property, she lives the first one on Oxford, I believe. Would that fencing issue be taken care of by site plan with the developer?
Through the mayor, that would typically be a requirement through the subdivision agreement. So if council would like to see that, that's something we can include in that a permanent fence be installed along that property line, that is something we can enforce, yeah.
Sure, so how do we actually ask for that? Just right now, or is that gonna come up back to us, or?
We can certainly make a note of it now, and that could be a condition that's added in the draft plan, so that it's ensured that it's in the final agreement when it comes forward.
That's in the site plan, right, David?
Yeah, and before, just for council's information, before a subdivision is registered, that agreement does come forward for council's approval. So you can definitely take a look to make sure that all those conditions that you'd like to see are in there.
Sure, I'd like to put that forward at some point so that you note that and make sure that happens. It just seems to be the right thing to do for somebody that is there and now has this possibly imposed on.
Actually, David, just one second. Joe, the former owner of the property, like, looking at your diagram, is your owner purchasing his house and removing it to, I'm just trying to get my bearings on your diagram here.
The house sits in the middle of the property. Correct.
But his house will remain?
No.
That's gonna be gone?
Yes.
Oh, okay, I got it now. Okay, thanks. Thanks, David. Okay, you've got your final verbiage, David?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one final reminder that anyone that would like to sign in, if you have provided comments already, we will have your information, so you don't need to sign the form again. You will be mailed a notice. But if you haven't, please feel free to sign the sheet at the back. And I'll just note one more time, if you wish to be notified of the approval of the draft plan of subdivision and or zoning bylaw amendment, you must make a written request to the clerk. Only those persons in public bodies that give the clerk a written request for the notice of adoption or passing of a zoning bylaw amendment will be given notice. The proposed draft plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment recommendation report will return to council at a future meeting. This concludes my portion of the public meeting, and I will now turn the meeting back to you, Mayor Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. So this time, if I could have Councilors Danch and Bruno move that the Development and Legislative Services Planning Division Report 2024-08 be received for information. Now is time for comments or further questions. Anything over here? Anything over here? All in favor? That's carried. Great job, everybody. Thank you for coming out and some great questions and everything. So we appreciate that. At this time, our meeting is adjourned.